I'm here really to talk about this initiative that I began to publicise in the summer, a call to prayer particularly for home educating Christian fathers. We'll get back to that, but can I say Ruth has produced some sheets here with those links on, because rather than give you references and you have to write things down all the time, that's the website. Call to prayer.home.blog is the website for the thing, but hiding on there, you'll only get it if you've got the link, is where all my references for what I'm going to say now are there. So if you want to find them, if you think, where did you get that from, go to that website. And what I want to do in this part, first of all, is find out where you're coming from. And therefore, I need you to answer some questions for me. The first few questions, they're dead easy. If you knew about these things, stick your hand up. If you didn't, don't worry, right? If later on I'm going to ask you to give me some answers, that'll be a bit more like school, but you can cope with that. Okay, so the first thing is, in England, did you know that there were 2 consultations in the last 2 years? Yeah. Hands, please. It's easier for me. Right, that's good. Okay. We're here in Wales. Right? Did you know there's a consultation in progress now? Where's the rest of you been? And there's another one on data sharing promised for November. Did you know that? Right. What about the Isle of Man? Did you know a new education bill is planned there? Introduced in October, possibly? Including potentially a 6 months imprisonment if parents don't comply. Did you know about that? Okay, let's go somewhere else. We're working our way around, you see, Northern Ireland. Did you know a consultation had recently closed there on home education? No? You haven't got tired, have you? Right. Much more helpful than the one that was in 2014, because home education families worked hard to achieve improvement. What about Scotland? Did you know that the guidelines for home education in Scotland are under review? I can actually give you, at the weekend, the chief leading home education organisation in Scotland actually published its prelim submission to the Scottish Government. They have been in talks with them, and that is due sometime soon. I don't know how it's going to be held, but things. But do you get a theme going on here? There's something happening about home education. Let's go outside of these shows. Here's a little bit of what seems like good news. A German court has granted homeschoolers Dirk and Petra Wunderlich custody of their minor children after they were removed in 2013. The original judge was replaced on grounds of bias. That's good news. They've got parental rights back for their family. A few days ago we were talking to some friends of theirs, but actually the family is not finding it at all easy. Their community doesn't want them around. They're ostracised. Did you pick up this one in Sweden? Or a court ordered a rabbi and his teacher wife to pay more than £78,000 for homeschooling 2 of their children. Swedish laws allows home education under special circumstances, but religion is not considered among them. Did you know about that? No? Okay. South Africa. Anybody know about the situation in South Africa in home education? It's in front of where we are, right? This is about down here, there's one link I've given you. It's still on the website for you to pick up. This is a response by a South African home education organisation to an article written by Professor Rita Neiman, head of academics at FutureLearn, which is a company that inspects home educated children. She expressed her support for the legislative changes in the home education policy in 2018 and in this Basic Educational Laws Amendment Bill, better known as BELA. These changes introduce a 6-year jail sentence for not registering and consequently not following the national curriculum. She believes these penalties are in place to ensure that children, I've got to jump onto it because I've run out, receive an education that is not inferior to the standard expected in a public school. The writer of this article says it asks hard questions about the Bella Bill. What are those hard questions? The first is about competence, the second about success, the third about double standards, the fourth about purpose, the fifth about the penalty, the sixth is about alignment. That cartoon was on the web article. I think that says it all. That tells you what this bill is about. Shaping the way children think to fit the box. Okay, some of you may get stuff from Barnabas Fund. Did you pick up this? A Cuban pastor and his wife have been jailed for educating their children at home to avoid them being taught atheism at school in the communist country. How many of you teach your children at home because you don't want them to pick up secular atheism? Quite a few, I hope. Pastor Rigal was jailed for 2 years and his wife Ada for 1.5 years on 23rd of April after being charged with acting against the normal development of a minor. It is normal development to teach a minor there is no God. Right? You can only develop a child properly if they're in school. What other messages can you take home from that? Okay, China. I don't know if you keep up with what's happening in China, but the director of Dafan County Ethic and Religious Affairs Bureaus in China's southern Guizhou province told a church in the region that it is illegal for parents to teach Christian hymns to their children and spread Christian thought. Any volunteers to live in China? Good job you're not Muslim then, because even the BBC tells you what happens to Muslims in China. All right? China is deliberately separating Muslim children from their families, faith and language in the far western region of Xinjiang, according to new research. What's happening? The BBC did an excellent piece of work. They're actually taking these kids, putting their parents in detention centres to re-educate them, and they're putting their kids in nurseries and other things where they're being taught to be Han Chinese, not to be Muslim. Now, okay, that's not Christian, but they're persecuting Christians in the same way. But you might say, why? Have you heard of any countries, have you heard of the United Nations standing up and saying to China, you shouldn't treat people like this? But haven't we got things like the European Human Rights Convention that says no person shall be denied the right to education in the exercise of any function which it assumes in relation to education to teaching? The state shall respect the rights of parents to ensure such education and teaching in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions. So what's happening in China? What about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, better known as the UNCRC? It says that states parties agree that education of the child shall be directed to, and in point C highlighted there, it says the development of respect for the child's parents, his or her own cultural identity, language and values, for the national values of the country in which the child is living, the country from which he or she may originate, etc. So what's going on if places, China particularly, but other places can say we don't respect the parents? Now, I want some verbal answers now. It's dead easy, it's not hard. How many of you remember this guy? Who is it? Ed Balls! Yeah! Do you remember what he was? Secretary of State for Children, Schools and Family. This was before he took up dancing. Right? He created the Department for Children, Schools and Family. Now, I'm just going to take a little detour off my main theme. Do you remember their logo? How many of you remember that? The rainbow. Back in 2007. Does it have any different meaning in your mind today? Yeah. I don't suppose many of you saw this booklet, The Children's Plan, published by Ed Balls just after he became Secretary of State. My wife thought they were dismantling that rainbow when she saw it. They're not, they're building it. Right? 12 years later, this is where the Department of Education has got to. Right? That is inside the Department of Education's headquarters. Picture taken in March 2000, or published in 2019, March. And on their letterhead, they've got this logo that says, I am an LGBTQ and plus champion. We cannot tell by looking at someone or by their name or how they self-define their gender. That is the Department of Education. Right? Where's that leading? Have you picked up the information about Parkview School in Birmingham? And other places there. You may want to ask me later what the connection is between what's happening with relationships and sex education and home educated. The two are parallel tracks. Right? That's all I'm saying about it now, because I want to stick with the home education. Who's that guy? Anybody remember him? What did he say? Go on. It is Mr. Graham Badman. You remember him? Ed Balls got him to commission his Badman review, which included investigating whether home education could be used as a cover for some forms of child abuse, such as forced marriage and domestic servitude. The review found no evidence to support the suggestions that home education was linked to forced marriage, servitude or child trafficking. It was Ed Balls who brought that in. Remember the name Kyra Ishak? 8-year-old Birmingham who was starved to death? She was technically home educated, but only for a few months. When she left school, her headmistress knew there was something wrong with the family and said to social services, please investigate this thing. So they sent education advisors along. Right? What most people don't know, when I raised it on a BBC call-in around that time, I got cut off air, was that 2 of her siblings were still at school and they were being starved. They were undernourished. But the mud has stuck. Right? It's stuck. Who's this gentleman?
Lord Soley.
Thank you, love. Lord Soley. You remember Mr. Clive Soley? Yeah? He said, the 5 words that worry me here are the vast majority of parents. Of course, the majority are good, but by implication, they accept there may be a problem with a minority. Many of our laws would be unnecessary if it wasn't for a minority. only a minority of parents abuse their children, and only a minority of home educating parents won't teach their children necessary basic skills, but they are the problem. So, if we are to protect the minority, we will need some power of intervention. I'm not sure if the bill has the right safeguards in it, but that is why we have parliamentary scrutiny. To claim it is excessive for the state to have a checking role here is, I think, wrong. Anybody know when Lord Soley said that? Roughly? A year? Anybody want to guess a year? Okay, I'll give you the answer. He put it on a Lords of the blog post on the 8th of February 2010. He only came out of the woodwork again 18 months, 2 years ago. I don't expect you to know that lady, but anybody want to guess? Or educated guess? She is Baroness Ruth Deach. And she said it is the duty of home educated parents to secure for their children the education pledged in international treaties. The parents do not have standalone rights to determine the education in any way that they wish without state regulation. She said that on the 8th of March 2010 in a debate in the House of the Lords on the Children's School and Families Bill that would have brought in Badman's proposals apart from going down calling a general election. Now, this lady, anybody know her? No. Maggie Atkinson. She was Children's Commissioner from March 2010 and fulfilled that role till 2015. Gateshead appointed her as a Director of Children's Services in 2003, and in 2009 she was a keynote speaker here. I'm going to show you us describing her job as a Director of Children's Services in 2009.
I'm currently Director of Children's Services. We are known as DCSs for short, in the wonderful borough of Gateshead, next door to, but not to be mistaken for, the equally wonderful city of Newcastle. So the Angel and the Bridge and the Sage and the Baltic and the Metro Centre are in Gateshead, okay? What does the DCS do then? In a nutshell, people aged pre-birth to 19 who live, work and study in my place are my responsibility. If they're registered with the Gateshead GP, they use our children's centres, play or parenting services, schools or the local college. If they get a bucket full of GCSEs, A-levels and diplomas, and if they don't. If they want to engage with us, and if they don't. If they win the Duke of Edinburgh Award at any level, or are star volunteers, performers, campaigners, spokespeople, community activists, already young leaders and citizens. If they need support because they have a special need, because they can't or they won't communicate, or are on a therapeutic programme, or are a young carer. If they live in a settled or a troubled family. If they need low-level mental and emotional support, or far more highly specialist and robust interventions, are in need, at risk, have a child protection plan, are young parents themselves, young offenders, incarcerated or otherwise, or those young offenders' victims, if they're ill or disabled, if they die aged under 18 from whatever cause, if they're in danger of being taken into, are already in, or have recently left care. Put simply, they are mine. And so are their families, their schools, the other settings they use, and everybody in their communities.
Put simply, they are mine. So are their families and everybody in their communities. That is one of the first Director of Children's Services speaking in this country, every LA has Sunday in that mould, with that mindset. Not just your children are their responsibility. You are. So is everybody in the community. Recognise him? Yesterday's news, but who recognises him? Does his name ring a bell? Michael Wilshaw? He ran Ofsted from 2012 to 2016. In November 2015, he conflated home education with the matter of unregistered school. And shortly afterwards, he introduced the fear of radicalisation into the debate. This lady, I hope some of you recognise her, Amanda Spielman. She is his successor. And to the Education Committee March last year, she said, yes, first and foremost is making sure that every child, wherever they are educated, has a decent education that sets them up properly for a good adult life in modern Britain, and that they are fully prepared educationally and culturally. Right? The education your children need to get, according to Amanda Spielman, is in her culture. That is what she is essentially saying. Some of you must recognise that lady. Yes. Present Children's Commissioner Anne Longfield. You may have seen her either on a recording or heard about her TV programme in February, Skipping School, Invisible Children, or the report she wrote. Did you know she also said this? Since then, it's an extract from a report of evidence given to the Education Committee, which appeared in the TES. Ms. Longfield said councils should assess children who are home educated as well as their parents twice a year to ensure they're receiving a proper education. But I do think then one or two more things, and she said, but I do think the local authority needs to be able to make that assessment. So, this is the attitude of our leading children's experts, right? Not just in England, but throughout these islands and elsewhere. So what about human rights? We all thought human rights was on our side, didn't you? Have you ever heard of general comments attached to human rights treaties? I hadn't till a few months ago. Right? The one on the Convention on the Rights of Children has 21 general comments attached to it. What are general comments? Well, this organisation, European Network on Independent Living, which is a disabilities group, but they're based in Brussels, says general comments are a treaty's body's interpretation of the provisions of its respective human rights treaties provisions and thematic issues. In other words, we're telling you what it says on the tin. Whatever you think the words say, this is what it's actually in the tin, right? These general comments are meant to be an extension and explication of the rights within the CRPD Convention, filling the rather abstract rights with detailed meaning. They're not legally binding instruments, though they're not legally binding instruments, they're highly authoritative interpretations of individual human rights, and form a set of criteria for evaluating the progress of member states in their obligations to properly implement these rights on a national, regional and federal level. Right? This is what does it. Jump down. Through the ratification of the convention, states accept that the treaty bodies play a key role in the interpretation of the enshrined rights, and therefore also in the monitoring of the proper implement of the latter. So it doesn't matter what the headline says, these things are understood by these general comments. So here's one of them. General comments are number one. General comment number one there actually is on the Convention of the Rights of the Child, Article 29.1, which is the one which speaks most about respecting parents, right? Now, these things, I have to say, they're written in legal doublespeak. So it's very hard to read them and get to understand what they're meaning. But what I'm going to do in the next few slides is give you a flavour of the 4 passages where home is mentioned in this document. Okay, so here's the first one. It's in point 8. Second, the articles attach importance to the process by which the right to education is to be promoted. Thus, efforts to promote the enjoyment of other rights must not be undermined and should be reinforced by the values imparted in the educational process. This includes not only the content of the curriculum, but also the educational process, the pedagogy, the methods, the environment within which the education takes place, whether it be in the home, school, or elsewhere. The aim is to dictate what happens in the home, school, or any place the child is. This is a bit about discrimination against children with disabilities, is also pervasive in many formal education systems and in a great many informal educational settings, including the home. All such discriminatory practices are in direct contradiction with the requirements in Article 29(1)(a), that the education of the child be directed to the development of the child's personality, talents, and mental and physical ability to their fullest potential. Right? Point 13. First, it emphasises the need for education to be designed in and provided in such a way that it promotes and reinforces the range of specific ethical values enshrined in the Convention, including education for peace, tolerance, and respect for the natural environment. Similarly, respect for the natural environment should be learnt by children at home, in school, and within the community, encompassed by national and international problems, and actively involved children in local, regional, or global environmental projects. It has long been stated, since 2001, that all children should be learned to be environmental activists, whether they're taught, wherever they're taught. So now we have a teenager with autism from Sweden leading the global environment movement. All right. Point 15. Article 29 can all be seen as a foundation stone for the various programs of human rights education called for by the World Conference on Human Rights. Human rights education should provide information on the content of human rights treaties, but children should also learn about human rights by seeing human rights standards implemented in practice, whether at home, in school, or within the community. Human rights education should be a comprehensive, lifelong process and start with reflection of human rights values in the daily life and experiences of children. What they define as human rights, by the way, are not the human responsibilities the scriptures lay out. Actually, the Bible talks about responsibilities, not about rights. This is a secular program, and they want you to teach your children those values. So, to put it simply, under this interpretation of the UNCRC, the state is required to monitor what you teach your children in your own home to ensure it complies with the UN's agenda. That is what human rights are about. So when you hear a politician like Baroness Deitch or Lord Soley says children have rights as well as parents, this is what they're talking about. Children's rights are to be taught as the UN and other bodies want them to be taught, not as you as parents. It's a complete smokescreen. Right, how does this come out? Well, this statement, you can have a guess who said this in a minute, but let me read the highlighted bits. To understand the substance of education, we have to understand the objectives. Because education should be about broadening minds, enriching communities, and advancing civilization, ultimately, it is about leaving the world in a better place than we found it. Then the speaker quotes Professor Michael Young, who said, schools enable young people to acquire the knowledge that, for most of them, cannot be acquired at home or in the community. Who said that? Richard. No. You wouldn't guess, so I'll tell you. Amanda Spielman. We've seen her earlier on in June 2017. Right, here's another one for you. I also talked about British values in my 2017 speech about the importance of embedding them within the wider curriculum. And I spoke about the need for a true civic education. Both of those remain just as true today. It's so important that all these values are taught and understood and lived. School is how and where we make sure that every young British citizen ends up with the same level of understanding. Because education is about a lot of things. Socialisation. By the way, just let me pause there. Socialisation. What about the socialisation, we get asked? And what do you think they mean by that word? How they relate to the people? How they play? How they know how to talk to older people and younger people? No. Socialisation, if you read the academic stuff by some people, is about how you fit into the society that is being built around you. I picked up that phrase in the first part of this about civic education. When you read socialisation, ask, is this person talking about being good in relationships, or are they talking about fitting in with civic education? It's about socialisation, encouraging harmony between different people, and about the advancement of civilization. Education pioneers across the world knew this as they began to formalise state education systems. They wanted to mould fine, upstanding citizens of the Republic as much as they wanted to instil knowledge and a habit of reading and learning. It will not surprise you, this is another one of Amanda Spielman's speeches. She knows what this agenda is, folks, far better than you and I do. And it is to produce fine, upstanding citizens of the state we want. So, civic education. Professor John Howson is now a Liberal Democrat councillor. He was an educational specialist, and he's got his own blog. And he wrote this in 2014, just after Michael Gove announced that independent schools would now have to promote British values. Right? And he says, I can understand a requirement on a school not to teach terrorism, but I believe it is a long way and worrying leap from there to the commandment that the schools must promote British values or they will be closed down. And then he goes on to say, and what about homeschoolers? Are they now also to be monitored for British values and parents told they cannot continue if Ofsted doesn't think they are British enough? Right? This man was a prophet. Right? God opened the door for me to have 2 articles on the TES website, Times Educational Supplement as was. And I was able to say how Howson's fears proved helpful to me when I had that thing, because I actually said 4 years later, this spring, that was in 2018, the EHE consultation envisaged such a change. The fundamental shift affects all parents and teachers. 2, no longer are they to be understood to be working in loco parentis, but in loco civitatis, or how you pronounce that Latin word. And is that right? Well, in April this year, we have the new guidelines published. Local authorities should interpret suitable in the light of their general duties, especially that in Section 13 of the Education Act, to the development of their community, and of the Section 175 of the 2002 Education Act requiring education functions are exercised with a view to safeguarding and promoting the welfare of children. Whilst these duties are very broadly drawn, it will be evident that if home education provided by a family taught children of values or behaviour which is in conflict with fundamental British values, then it would not be in accordance with the authorities' general duties to regard that education as being suitable. Howson was right. Right? However, I love that last phrase. However, there is no requirement. That is meaningless. Right? Now, what's behind all this? You have no idea why I'm showing you a web page from St Paul's School in London, right, about safeguarding a pupil and welfare. Well, they took this. They've done some work to make sure they're safeguarding pupil, and I've redacted, in good government style, I've redacted some names there, right? Since 2014, an ongoing objective has been to achieve and then maintain beacon status for safeguarding process and practice within the UK independent sector to that end. In 2014, Professor was commissioned to conduct a thorough and independent review of current safeguarding practice and culture and make recommendations how the school can achieve the objective. Professor is well known in maintained sector education, a campaigner for children's rights through UNICEF, and a former director of children's services and his team included senior figures from polling, children's charities and the independent sector. What is the name of the professor? We've mentioned him already. I'll take away the hiding. Professor Badman. Right? I didn't realise that till I came across this article on a website by a non-Christian home educating mum who we know, and she was talking about other things, but she pointed out there that he became a trustee, a member of and board member of UNICEF in July. The one thing I haven't been able to track down is there's UNICEF International, the headquarters, and there's UNICEF UK, which is an independent charity but works within their remit. And I'm not sure whether these references are to UNICEF International or UNICEF UK. But, right, so there's been a link from the start, because in 2009 is when he did his review in thing. So civic education, what can be done, especially in the light of the whole home educating community being exhausted and unsure where to turn. Well, that's what I'm here to talk about, really, having given you the background. I believe as Christians the only thing we can do is to seek the Lord. We need him to be gracious to our children and to theirs, and that's why I've made this call to prayer. On the website, there's the front page is the need, there's one about the call, but there is also one about why pray. And when you have stats for how many people looked at your pages, you know this is the one people aren't getting to, and I want to encourage you to get there. You see, it's all too easy to blame other people on blame our difficulties on others. We can talk about it being the devil's fault. We can talk about it being secularists or politicians. But you know, the Bible is very good. It tells us all to look in the mirror. And on that article about why pray, I list various passages. They're coming up on the screen, and you can always look it up on the website. And they all give you an outline of how God talked to Israel about children and how they responded when it went wrong. And they all pick up on the principle in Galatians 6 verse 7 that says, whatever a man sows, that he will reap. I think sometimes we underestimate that. I really think we do. And I think we need to go back to God and say, what have we been sowing, either collectively or personally, in order to be reaping what we're reaping. And I end up on the article saying, I'm proposing a day initially for us to come together to find out from the Lord an understanding on two basic issues. The first one, what is the reason he has allowed this situation to arise? And secondly, faced with it, how should Christian home education families respond? And that's what we can begin to talk about in the question time. You may have seen that logo up in the top. Why have I put Nehemiah 4:17 as kind of the verse for this? It says, those who built on the wall and those who carried burdens loaded themselves so that with one hand they worked on construction and with the other hand they held a weapon. My burden is, I'm not saying we need to pray and do nothing else. And I'm not saying we need to do something else and forget praying. I'm saying as Christian home educating families, we need to be praying and campaigning and doing things and raising our voices. But we need to know what God has to say to us, how we can be right with him, and what we should be saying out to the wider home educating community and to the public. Not on the website yet is the date and the location of the call to prayer, initial date, which is on Saturday, October the 2nd, 12th, sorry. I've been talking too long, in Nuneaton. I'll give you full details when you let me know. If you want to get involved, send me an email via the website, or if you don't do internet, talk to us today. Okay? Finally, also on this table are two leaflets that I wrote last year for Christian families. You know, the battle isn't just out there in the world. Quite often in churches, Christians can get pilloried for home educating. So there's two leaflets there, one on the biblical foundations and one on family education in a secular society. They're permanently on our main website, and also on our main website, if you look around, you'll find some general material on home education.